It's Sunday, March 8th, 2020, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. I'm Sean Sullivan, an independent product management consultant, and I'm also a mentor in the Product Mentor program. The Product Mentor program is a global initiative in over 20 countries around the world where mentors and mentees get paired up in the field of product management to help make better product decisions, better products, and most importantly, better product people. Learn more at theproductmentor.com. And today I'll be leading a conversation on developing product intuition. Please post your questions to the YouTube chat, and I'll do my utmost to answer your questions as they come in real time. So let's begin. So today's talk, again, is on developing product intuition, and I'm going to break it down into 3 parts today for you. First, starting with the limitations of data-driven product management. Second, a definition of product intuition and how that complements your data-driven practices. And third, I'm going to share 5 practices for how you can develop better product intuition. First, a little bit of background on myself. Again, my name's Sean Sullivan. I've been in product management and product marketing for about 20 years now. Probably my most significant stint was with an Israeli startup named Actimize. In 2004, I was hired as the first product manager. About 3 years later, we got acquired for around $270 million. And then we proceeded to grow significantly for years after that. As we developed and grew that organization, I ran product management, product marketing functions, and portfolio management, among other things, throughout that time. And today, I'm happy to say that Actimize continues to be a leader in the field of financial crime and compliance. I've since left and did a stint as the head of product marketing for an AI company. And today, I am an independent product management consultant running my own firm, Product Stride. Let's begin. Data-driven product management. This is a concept that we see very much pervasive in the world of product management and product marketing thought leaders today. And it is really driven by changes in technology, changes in the product landscape as we move to SaaS and digital products that enable collecting a lot more data in an easier way on usage patterns, product analytics. We've developed new functions that are really around developing better data practices, including product ops that helps organizations take advantage of the data that they have and find ways to sort of scale their data-driven practices. Of course, technologies from big data and data science help. But even when we look at something like the lean startup movement and the build, measure, learn learning loop, we see that really, in order to measure, you have to produce some sort of test that captures some data from that test. And that is, again, just another example of where data is everywhere. Even how we manage our organizations, our teams, with tools like OKRs today, we are hyper-focused on data. If you go to any online forums, you'll see a lot of discussion about data-driven decision-making today. Just last week on a Facebook group, I saw an open question go out saying, what is the most significant advice anybody ever gave you. And sure enough, the second response was, don't make any decisions without hard data. And that got plenty of likes and accolades. Just yesterday, in a product management forum on LinkedIn, again, there was a post about how critical being data driven is to developing product management careers. So it really is pervasive and everywhere today. Yet, if we focus on making decisions on hard data alone, we're going to limit our odds of success. Now, this is something I'm going to walk through a few examples of demonstrating this for you. And hopefully it's not too scary for those that live and die by data today. But if we look at this first example, we can see that sometimes you don't have all the hard data you would like. There's cases where you do, like if you are doing an A/B test on different types of designs, let's say for a workflow in your application, you can readily see, okay, 70% of the users are more efficient or more successful at reaching some outcome with option A than with option B. That's very hard data. You can make some decisions based on that data. Other times we have ambiguous data. Sometimes this is anecdotal data. Let's say you do some customer discovery work. Let's say you're a B2B company. You have 100 customers out there. You meet with 5 of them, and 4 of them either tell you directly or through your research and questions, you unearth that 4 of them have a consistent, specific problem. Now, you don't know for a fact that this carries forward to 80% of your customer base or 80% of your potential customers out there in the market. But you have a good indicator that there might be something worth further exploration. Lastly, there's situations where we just don't have any data. We don't have good data at all. When we think about any data-driven practice, we're really talking about capturing information about something that already happened. Data is only historical. It tells you what happened in the past. You may be able to develop some sort of analytical model that predicts the future out of it, but you don't really know. For instance, if you are rolling out a new payment system, and that's a fintech startup, you have a new payment system, you're launching it, on day one, you don't actually know the volume of activity you're going to get in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So how do you decide to architect for data volumes and usage patterns that you have no real good grasp of? Do you size the system or build it so it can infinitely scale with some sort of elastic capabilities on your back end? Or do you make a different trade-off in the decisions that you make? These are situations where you don't have good data. You're never going to have perfect data. You may not even have data at all. Second, even if you collect data, sometimes you get bad data. And I'll give an example. A lot of clickstream analysis that you do, or even product analytics, there is a chance that sometimes there's an error in a hiccup, let's say, in your network or your ability to collect that data. So you've got gaps in that data. You can use some statistics and different techniques for smoothing out those gaps. But in fact, you are making some assumptions about those gaps. Further, you may get in a situation where you're trying to correlate a lot of different data and store it. When you do this, if you're getting data from many different sources, let's say your CRM, some product analytics tool, you may be having to match up different streams of data and store it in ways that are not quite perfect. And this is in the best cases. Sometimes, just from a lack of expertise, we as product organizations may be trying to store and leverage this data in ways that are on the edge of our technical abilities, but we're trying to do the best we can with that data. And this especially holds true if we're applying some more advanced statistical analysis or even machine learning type algorithms into that data, where we may be using some open source tools and think we have a pretty good understanding of what the output is, but we're not really experts in those approaches. So we may be making some errors in judgment on how we are interpreting that data, either through the tools that we chose to use are not exactly right, or our interpretation of the output may not be exactly as we expect it to be. And finally, even after you do the best job that you can in collecting and analyzing data, there is a chance that you can fail to communicate it effectively to the rest of your product team, to your management. And this is a problem with all forms of communication, but in particular, in data-driven practices, we expect that that the data is perfect. And if you're not properly conveying the fact that there could be some risk in the numbers that you're collecting, some ambiguity, that may lead us to bad decisions. Third, this notion of analysis and decision paralysis. Many times we'll do some sort of test. Let's use an A/B test again as an example, and we'll find ourselves with very similar outcomes on both options. So what do? We can choose the one that got a slight statistical advantage in the outcomes, but taking in other factors, we may realize that that may not be good enough. So we may spend some time further developing the tests and maybe running longer tests in order to get something more definitive. But what's going to happen is, if we spend a lot of time trying to identify the perfect answer based on these types of data-driven practices, we're actually going to create some sort of opportunity cost. Eventually, at some point, trying to get more and more hard, good data may lead you to a point where you would have been much better off by selecting even an inferior or suboptimal path initially. And this opportunity cost is driven by a desire to, let's say, an excessive desire to get hard data to make and support all of your decisions. This is just not the way that it works in everyday life within the product space. We have to make decisions sometimes quickly, sometimes with imperfect data. Okay, so my fourth example and last one here around the limitations of data-driven practices is that even if you are able to collect really good data and you've got experts in how to analyze that data and you're effective at communicating it, eventually decisions have to be made based on that analysis, and not every decision based on hard data is going to be a great decision. I'm going to give 5 quick examples here from some well-known companies and where they made bad decisions, in spite of the fact that they each are well known for the not just the types of data that they collect and the volumes of it from their users, but their ability to analyze and make effective use out of that data in their decision-making process. So let's start with, these are all popular. Let's start with Apple, and an example from just, well, a few years ago. Apple Music was much younger then. They were working to try to really promote and grow that platform for the music listening public. And what they decided to do was take advantage of the new release of U2's Songs of Silence album and push that out to all of their user community. Now, what happened was it was a well-meaning promotion where they thought, no big deal, we can push out free music, everyone will love it. If they don't love it, they just won't listen. Well, in fact, they could have done a little bit more analysis, and they probably had a good understanding from their past user analysis of how many people actually listen to U2 in the past. How many albums does a typical Apple Music listener buy and download onto their devices? If they had been thinking about these things, as well as the currents of the time, which were consumers were starting to really not like it when they felt technology companies were forcing things on them, they would have made a very different decision. But as they did, they rolled out, pushed this album out to millions, to all of their subscribers, and they got massive flack for that. Facebook, as a second example, again, well known for the data they collect and lots of different decisions they make, good and bad, around different ethical quandaries that they may have with politics and such. But let's go back a few more years to something less politically sensitive and talk about a product that they decided to launch called Beacon. Facebook Beacon, again, this is a situation where the public clearly stated when they launched this product that they only wanted that they understood the value of this product for Facebook. And just stepping back, the Beacon was basically a tracking device that Facebook partners could put on their websites, and Facebook would get all of the data so they could build a more comprehensive profile of users so that they could have more effective advertising for them. And for the users, presumably, so they get more relevant ads put in front of them instead of things that didn't matter to them. So what transpired was, despite Facebook initially talking about the Beacon in public and getting a bit of pushback about concerns from privacy groups and individuals that people didn't want to be tracked off of Facebook without opting into it, Facebook made the decision to say, you know what? No, actually, we know better. We won't capture that data unless you specifically opt in. And it turns out they launched it. They actually ended up having to, once it became known that they were collecting large amounts of this data, they had to undo that quickly, and they killed the Beacon project. Google, a very different scenario here, and I'm going to talk outside of their typical search and advertising markets. They have the Chrome browser, and the Chrome browser is used by probably a significant, the most significant portion of internet users for web browsing and for enterprise applications. So it's not just for looking at, commerce sites and news sites for consumers, but businesses rely on it as their front end for their enterprise software applications. So what Google did was a very good data-driven practice of feature flagging. They push out their software on a regular basis, frequent updates to Google Chrome, and in it they include a new feature. This feature is something that they were not sure exactly how it would work when it's released to the public. So they wanted to disable it for all but the less than 1% fraction of their users. Now, when they saw that this user population was getting benefits from it as anticipated, and they decided that now would be a good time to switch this feature on for 100% of the Google Chrome users. What transpired was um, they they ended up basically disabling Chrome browser access for hundreds of thousands of corporate users across the world that relied on virtual machines and a controlled rollout to production process, because those enterprise customers are so concerned with control and quality that they stage software before they put it into the hands of users. Google, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they knew better than their customers and that they could just turn on features remotely. This, of course, was, let's say, not only a PR problem, but had a real cost impact to those customers that were directly impacted by this. A different type of bad decision making. Let's say it's debatable about whether or not this is bad decision versus just not seeming like a great decision. So Netflix is renowned for the massive investments it's making in content, and they get a lot of great reviews for the content that they put out there. In the last year, the last Academy Award season year, they spent reportedly close to $300 million producing various movies in order to win, to try to both win eyeballs during the current year with movies like The Irishman, but they also spent a considerable amount in promoting these movies for Academy Award consideration. And that was something reported around $70 million that they spent to do that. And they ended up garnering 24 nominations. But come Academy Award night, they won 0 of the top 4 categories, such as Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Actor, and whatever the fourth category was. But all of this money was spent, and it didn't produce the outcomes that they expected. And not only did they spend that $300 million producing these films, but they spent even more money, really record sums of money, trying to promote them to the Academy to try to sway their votes. And instead, a movie called Parasite that had a minuscule budget, probably smaller than the PR campaign cost Netflix, swept the major categories. Last example, because it's one of my favorite products, or product lines, is Sonos. For those that aren't familiar with Sonos, they make fantastic devices for listening to music, really a smart speaker system for your home. Now, what they decided to do a couple months ago was, in order to get to focus on innovation and drive their great customer base to buy new products, they would issue an end of life for older products. The problem is that speakers, unlike other smart devices like iPhones, they historically have lifespans of 10, 20 years when you mount them in your walls, when you put them in different rooms throughout your home. People don't expect after 4 or 5 years for those things to no longer work. And in fact, what Sonos could have done with all of the data they had, they could have easily seen, and I have to assume they did, they could have seen the listening patterns of these really faithful customers of theirs that have had the products for 4, 5, 6 years, and that they still actively listen to them on a daily basis for some period of time. I know this because they send out the stats to me on a periodic basis and all their customers about how people are using the products. But instead, they decided to end the life and make it worse, even by saying, if you choose to buy a new product, we'll give you a discount if you're using one of these old products. So if you further make that decision, we are going to brick that old product so you can no longer use it again. Even though it's working perfectly fine today, we're going to make it so that it's inoperable. This is just unacceptable to most longtime customers, even those that wanted to buy new products from Sonos. And sure enough, within a matter of days, the CEO of Sonos had to come out and retract that plan and announce that they would come up with a new plan where they're going to use more of a carrot approach to get people to upgrade as opposed to the stick. Now, these are 4 examples of where 4 different areas where there are limitations in data-driven product management practices. So, given these limits, how do we manage when we don't have enough data or any data? And when we do have data, how do we make the most effective use of that data that we do have? I'm going to now get into that a little bit. And I just want to remind everybody that if you haven't already, it's a great time to ask questions. You can do that throughout the presentation. I'll be happy to take any comments and questions that come in the remainder of the talk. Okay, so product intuition. So this is how we make the best use of the data-driven practices that we have. What is product intuition? It's a learned subconscious process that allows us to connect some sort of weakly associated concepts and facts and ideas that are floating around that we've gathered throughout time, and really to sort of know or understand something novel by connecting those dots. You may know this as something like a product sense, or maybe it's a hunch or gut feeling. Some call it good judgment. I know throughout my career, very often, I've often seen some product managers that I view as having really good hunches and gut feelings when they make their product decisions, and others that seem to not have the best product intuition. But this is, of course, this is where complementing data-driven practices, a good product intuition is going to really sort of supercharge your abilities and success as a product person. I see a question come in here. Let me just read that and take that quickly. Let's see. From Rama Myers, how do you recommend PMs defend and rationalize product intuition decisions to other stakeholders? That's a very good question. So I think we'll cover a bit more of this shortly in explaining the background behind product intuition. But just in short, what we need to understand first and foremost is that those examples of where product and data-driven practices are going to be limiting sometimes. So probably the most common scenario that I find in defending product intuition practices is where time is of the essence, and we can basically show that there's not going to be a path to getting really hard data to make those decisions in sufficient time that's required to take advantage of whatever opportunities in front of us. Now, as we go through and talk a bit more about some of the specific examples of where product intuition comes into play, it'll become much more clear as to how this plays out. So thank you for that question, and if there's more, please feel free to share them throughout the presentation. All right, so let's get started with Albert Einstein, and I'm not going to read the quote directly, but what Einstein is well known for is a process that he used to describe as visualizing the outcome that he was expecting, visualizing where he wanted to go with a particular concept, be it mathematical or scientific concept. Now, what this really relates to is the scientific method. He's developing, whether explicitly or not, a hypothesis that is really based on both his intuition that he's developed over years of past experiences, and something that's inspiring him to move it forward. So now I'm going to share some more specific examples that we as product people experience throughout our lives, from the very first day that you decide to take a role as a product person. You're making a decision that's based on limited data. You may be getting hired by a startup, and you may, in some cases, have had very limited exposure to the product that they're offering. If it's a consumer product, possibly you've seen it. If it's a B2B product, a lot of times you may not have been able to have access to it. You've never seen the product. You don't know how well it works. You don't know how excited the customers are in using it. But you have people telling you things anecdotally about the product and the customers and the market that it's serving. You may even be offered something as a product manager in a startup that's like options. But how do you really understand how to value those options based on where the company is today? Sometimes in some companies you can get some visibility into that, but you're really going with your gut feeling at a certain point with whatever data you can collect from the interviewing process and your external research and the offer letter that has one number on it, which is the amount of salary they're going to pay you. Later on, after you take that job, of course, you may be asked to develop a product vision. Now, that product vision is going to be anchored in an understanding of the market that you serve, the core problems within that market. But ultimately, you're drawing a line in the sand somewhere out on the horizon that is based on your good product intuition, something that you've developed over time, and then you're going to work to sell people on that. But it's not strictly based on the data. It's not based on something that you can collect and point to and say, see this data point, this is exactly the vision that we have. This is where we're headed in the future. Some additional examples. So a lot of times we like to use metrics and different forms of metrics to drive our decision-making process and to figure out, okay, have we met the next milestone that the organization needs, or are we headed in the right direction? So product market fit is a huge tool for understanding if you've met a certain milestone in your product life cycle. But how do you determine what is the measure of product market fit for you? You can use the superhuman approach with the regret test. You can use other approaches that have been talked about, but really it's going to come down to some understanding of your market, your product, the technology that you have, and other aspects of your business that are going to help you determine what the metric is to measure product market fit. Just like the one metric that matters, or if you follow the North Star metric, you are picking out of a sea of possible indicators for your business, which one matters. How do you do that? There are some approaches to narrow it down, but ultimately you're working from your gut. Product roadmaps, we talk about prioritization frameworks. There's all sorts of frameworks that people use. Some are, let's say, better than others, but really many of them lead to some sort of objective ranking or prioritization scheme of a backlog of items that you lay out into a roadmap, of problems that you wish to solve, outcomes you hope to achieve, tasks and features, depending on exactly where you are and how far into the future of your roadmap. But choosing which framework to use and then making the decision to accept those objective measures or override them with additional subjective inputs, these are all aspects of relying on your product intuition and your gut. So moving on, we talked about hypothesis-driven design and A/B testing, a few examples. I'm going to use a couple examples outside of the direct day-to-day work that a lot of product managers get into and talk about partnering. If anybody has ever worked in their organization to make buy, build, partner decisions, and then you decide that partnering is the right option, or buying for that matter, it is not an easy decision to make. You may believe that it's a commodity and it may not be core to the IP of your business, but what you need to do is you need to actually go out and assess the market. Maybe you find 3 or 4 providers that can satisfy a particular need, but they're all going to be different. They're going to have different practices, different release practices, quality, different reputation in the market. They're going to have a different level of maturity. Do you work with someone that's newer to the scene or someone that's mature that that you can rely on because they've been doing this for years? There's a lot of different balancing acts, even though you may have 5 key features that you want out of some partnership. Even the terms of the agreement are not going to match up perfectly. So you have to make some judgment in this world of ambiguity, and it's a tough decision to make when you have to pick a partner. Even more difficult is if you're doing some M&A work. Now, I've had the good fortune of being in a number of due diligence processes where my company's either being acquired or acquiring other companies. And what happens is in a due diligence process, if you're responsible for, let's say your organization breaks it up into tracks and you are responsible for the product track and you're evaluating the products of a business that you're considering buying, you have a very difficult task to do. You have to understand exactly how the products work, what the future of those products look like. If you're thinking about integrating them into your products, you have to understand if the technology fits and if the people and the teams behind them are a good fit culturally with your organization. There's a lot of different factors that go into these decisions, and you have very, very limited time generally in a due diligence process. Sometimes there's a bit of resources that are provided ahead of time, but then you show up into a two-day, maybe a week-long session where you have intense meetings with leadership from the other organization. And at the end of this, you sit around a table with your peers in your organization running different tracks. You summarize your findings, and then you give an up or down vote. There is no hard data about whether or not this is going to work out or not. No hard data whatsoever. It's a gut decision. So maybe I've scared you a little bit into thinking that, oh no, all these data-driven practices I've been reading about and learning and practicing are not going to be my salvation. But I have good news. Despite past experience in my life and maybe in yours, where you've worked with product people that have some better judgment and some lesser judgment than others, the really good news is that product intuition, as I defined before, is absolutely a learned process. So whether you consider yourself good, mediocre, or sort of really needing to hone these skills, the great thing is that there are some practices you can do in order to improve your product intuition. So I'm going to cover five general categories of practices that you can do. And they start with continuous and diverse learning. We all know when when we're working in product that we really need to understand our product. We need to understand our users. But sometimes that's where we sort of keep focused on what we're learning about. We really need to understand, especially in B2B, about the economic buyers, the motivations within the market of those buyers. Maybe that could be regulatory dynamics, maybe the competitive spaces that your typical buyers are in. You need to understand the types of technology that your users are used to working with, understand where technology trends are going. You need to understand what the mood of the population is. So, examples here, there's lots of examples here where by learning about a diverse set of data points, you're able to sort of build up those different dots that later you're going to try connecting. So take, for example, in the B2B space, frequently we learn from patterns that have already been solved in consumer technology. Let's say a really big couple examples from the last several years is one is social media came in large way into the workflow applications that businesses use. Another one that has sort of peaked and sort of died down a little bit, but is like gamification to increase engagement. This is really popular with HR and training type applications in the business space. Now, on the consumer side, we also steal from businesses. So about data security, about scaling and real-time needs within systems. These sort of hardening aspects to technology is a direction that the average consumer is demanding more and more. And consumer companies can steal liberally from business software providers that have learned how to solve and some patterns for tackling these issues in the past. So continuous learning is what builds up all the different background concepts and ideas that you have. Now, one way to sort of start forcing yourself to think about how patterns emerge out of these data points is to write or journal. You can write blogs, you can just journal for your own purposes. Maybe you can write articles for your organization that get published. But what writing does, and even presenting like this live stream, is it forces you to take some loose concepts and structure them into a pattern or a story. And that story becomes a powerful backdrop for how you can understand how a market works much better, how your users operate much better. And it helps you have a better sense of what will work and won't work. So it gives you a really good way to start testing any ideas that you have early on, even before you have good sound data to support those decisions. Now, the third practice is really practicing, learning to trust your gut. And I'm going to give two specific examples of ways that we can practice to learn to trust our gut. The first, very simply, is start by making some predictions. At the beginning of the year, we're now just a little bit into 2020, you can make some predictions on major initiatives that your organization is working on. Or more narrowly, you can make some predictions, even places where you're planning to collect data and to do some testing. Make predictions of the outcomes that are going to be achieved. And at the end of a period of time, go back and look and see how well your predictions are turning out. What you'll find is, if this is a recurring process for you of making predictions and using hindsight to check those predictions, you'll find that you can actually improve your ability to make predictions. You're not going to always make the right prediction, but you'll find that more and more often you're starting to be able to make better ones, just simply through practice. If you never practice, you're never going to be good at all at being able to trust your gut. The second great practice here is around this concept of one-way and two-way door decisions that Jeff Bezos talked about several years ago in a letter to his shareholders at Amazon. And specifically, the concept is a one-way door decision is one where once you go through that door, once you make that decision, you can't get back in. A two-way door is quite the opposite, where you make a decision, you go through the door, you look around a bit on the other side, and if you realize it was the wrong decision, you can come back through. There may be a cost, a penalty associated with that, but you can come back through. So let's look at some examples of a one-way door versus two-way door. One way may be deciding to shut off a large chunk of your application because you find that it's not profitable, something like that, and you literally shut down and remove the data from your systems, maybe because of privacy concerns. You don't want that sensitive data out there anymore. Once you do that, you can't get that back. You might be able to rebuild something similar, but you can't undo that decision. What we find, though, is that two-way door decisions are much more common. When you make a decision, whether it's to prioritize a feature or if you decide which hypothesis to do first or what your hypothesis is, these are two-way door decisions. You can make these decisions and comfortably walk them back. There is some gradation between a one-way door and a two-way door, but increasingly, if you can identify those decisions you're making that are reversible, you can learn to trust your gut by making those decisions much more quickly and comfortably without as much data. On the flip side, if you have a one-way door type decision, you should spend more time trying to get the best data that you can to make a really sound decision, because you can't have it back. All right, third practice is meditation. So I'm not someone that meditates, but what I do, and I consider analogous to it, is running. I run a lot, and when I do, I frequently find my mind wandering, and what it's doing is it's actually sort of subconsciously sort of looking at all the different data points around ideas that have been bouncing around my head, and it's starting to connect the dots. It's actually opening up the flow of connection between the different concepts and ideas and facts that I may have collected over time. So when you meditate or when you run or do other kind of mindless activities like this, you can find that suddenly you have that epiphany moment where some decision that you were working on and you're unable to solve, you couldn't figure out how to get data for something, you couldn't figure out how to message something correctly in a live stream presentation, all of a sudden it hits you. It comes together and you see, A, B, C, this makes perfect sense. This is how it lines up. And this is based on this principle of meditation and sort of opening up the flow of thinking between these seemingly unrelated concepts. Okay, so the last practice is creativity. So this can be something like Legos, as you see here, but something different than working on journaling or writing, as I said before. That's a creative pursuit, I fully believe, as is a lot of things in product management. But here I'm talking more about leveraging a lot more right brain activity than the left brain data logic driven side of your thinking. And what we want to do is, to the best of our ability, practice creativity, because it supercharges all of those connections between the dots that you have of the data, the ideas, the facts, and those open channels of flow and connection between those different thoughts ends up being really, really highlighted when you start practicing creative pursuits much more frequently. So that's it. that's where we are. 5 great practices for you. The 3 takeaways that I want you to leave with today are: first, focusing on hard data alone and data-driven decision-making alone is going to limit your odds of product success. Now, good product tuition perfectly complements and enhances these data-driven product management practices that you have. And the good news is that product intuition is something that you can learn and develop through good practice. I provided a few good ideas of practices that you can leverage. Let's see, I've got one more question that I'll use before I summarize. Let's see. Oh, Rama, this is a difficult and a great question. I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for this, because what happens when product manager's intuition is at odds with management's product intuition? Well, basically, what I'm first off, this is going to be dictated a little bit by the culture of the organization that you're in and how you have to demonstrate decision making. And in some organizations, unfortunately, the sort of the hippo gets to make some overriding decisions. But what I'd say is, if you're practicing these developmental practices that I suggest, in particular, if you're continuously out there learning and then learning how to connect those dots, and if you're learning how to structure and communicate through journaling about how things are connected, you'll be able to tell a story that supports your decision, and hopefully that will carry the day. Sometimes you may be in a situation where your product leadership may differ with you, but what you can do is, again, is sort of collect these, and when you get a chance, either for yourself or even better, talk to your leadership and say, listen, this is what I believe. This is why we don't have hard data. We can't get it because of these reasons, or it'll take too long. But this is the rationale. And then say, if we go with your decision, let's agree to go back and look at this in 3 weeks or 3 months or a year, depending on the time horizon that we're talking about, and agree to sort of evaluate what would actually happen based on this decision. And that may not change their mind, but at least give you some sort of framework that both you're able to test your predictive capabilities and keep honing those, but you're also able to have an honest discussion with your management later on. So I believe that's it for the questions. Just wrapping up the practices again. Thank you, everybody that joined us, and Rama, especially, for those great questions. We have 5 key developmental practices I want to highlight again: continuous and diverse learning, journaling or other types of writing to structure your thinking, learning to trust your gut through practice, some form of meditation to free your thoughts, and practicing creativity to supercharge them. All right. So thank you to everyone for joining us today for our discussion of developing product intuition. As always, the presentation will also be posted to our SlideShare channel. And don't forget, if you are interested in being a product mentor, just like me, to product people of all sorts all around the world, visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. Follow us on Instagram at Product People. And if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And finally, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. And see you all next time. Goodbye.